Hello, everyone, and welcome to this new edition of Dreamers and Unicorns show. And of course, as always, we have two amazing guests today. And thank you for all the questions that you've shared on social media with me, as well as all the ones that you've emailed to me. We are going to try and see if we can get as many of these questions over. And if you're there, so just, I'm going to request you to just encourage me by putting your comments in the out there in the comment section, so I know that you can hear me, you are listening to me, and you have the opportunity to listen to two of the brightest guys who are going to talk to you about some of the questions that you've all been raising. So without further ado, I'm going to add to the stream the first person. So George, George, would you like to just introduce yourself? And before you do that, let me just say welcome to Professor George Kohlreiser. He is part of the IMD faculty, also a police hostage negotiator. My God, I mean, is that a tough job to do? Is it an easy job to do, George?
It is a tough job, and you learn a lot, and it's one of the most rewarding there is. And yes, I am professor at IMD in Lausanne, teaching in one of the flagship programs, the High Performance Leadership Program. I'm passionate about leadership. I'm passionate about bringing in cutting edge ideas. And as I share with you, a deep interest in talent development in the leadership arena.
Fantastic. Thank you. And I'm now going to add my second guest, Professor Charles Dhanraj. I met Charles a few years back for a program that both of us were running for Mahindras. So, Charles, good to connect back with you here. Welcome. And would you like to tell us a little bit about the kind of work that you're doing right now?
Abhijit, it's a pleasure to be with you, and you have done phenomenal things, and it's nice to see the new book, and it's nice to join this podcast. And you have to know, George opened a new world for me, the world of emotions, the world of the behavioral side was altogether new to me, and I will talk more about it as we go along. So it's fantastic to have this, to be with you both.
Absolutely. So, looking forward to all this things that. So, without further ado, I'm going to request all the people who've tuned in. So, do leave your questions in the comments section. And as we sort of move along, I'm going to try and see I can take in as many of the questions. That's the fun of a live session. But I'm going to really start by asking both of you this whole question that, Charles, you have talked a lot about globalization and strategy for countries collaborating across. And here we have in the year 2020 the pandemic. And my question really is it the end of globalization? And it's, of course, all the questions are for both of you. So feel free to jump in. So is that something that we should bid goodbye to? No more globalization because countries are closing borders. What do you say?
Let me defer to George first, and then I'll come back. Yeah, George.
Well, I think there's the negative side that's happening to globalization, where you have nationalism taking over, strict tribal views about life, religion, politics, and these tribal views are creating a lot of alienation. However, at the same time, we see the virus is crossing across all lines. It does not recognize national boundaries. So there is a push towards nationalization, but we have to understand the grief behind this whole tribalization, because we are, after all, world citizens. And we have too many people in politics and in organizations who are over-focused on being a citizen only of your country. So yeah. I think there's a danger part, and there's also an opportunity.
Yeah. The end of globalization, nice title for a cover page for Economist and Time, right? But actually, if you really think about it, the globalization is now taking on a new wings. Abhijit, you know this because digitalization is what you write about, right? Now, we used to think about globalization in the traditional global, what you call the product terms. I mean, the movement of goods and movement of finance and materials, right? The digital is changing the whole world. I mean, think about this pandemic, a small city nobody would have heard about before. From that, we can the whole world can be affected. So what we are recognizing is this is the inevitable phenomena we are going to. At the same time, what George is referring to is the human cry for recognition, for that individuality. So how do we come up with a globalization 4.0, a globalization with a human face? And that's where the real challenge is.
So when whenever there is some kind of adversity, so one of the things people say is that adversity actually brings people together. So you have a very tough scenario, and so is that going to actually let people come in together? The countries are going to forget, or at least reduce some of the animosity they hold towards each other, and then really start to figure out how do we do things which we can collaborate together on.
Let me take a first shot at that, Charles. I think crisis normally will bring people together when there is good leadership. But when there's poor leadership, crisis can be used to overprotect. The brain needs psychological safety, and globalization is in part, for some people, a threat to that psychological safety. They see it not as an opportunity, but something that is dangerous, something that is filled with ambiguity. So leaders have to be able to bring into focus the advantages of what's going to happen in that process. Psychological safety is the fundamental process behind that psychologically and emotionally. And let's face it, we are human beings who happen to think. We are really feeling beings. Emotions drive decisions. Behavior economics has proved that. And we see that in this whole arena of how people are responding to globalization and the pandemic.
It is interesting you refer to this, the importance of emotions, whereas, and that's something I totally believe, because even in my book, I talk about the rise of emotions in the workplace. Is that something that you observe where you sit at your vantage point, both of you, when you're looking at, what's the scenario like in a US environment and let's say in the European environment? How is it going to shape up? What's your take?
I think my biggest discovery, or what I have learned from George, was the centrality of emotions in everything we do. I mean, as a teacher, like George, if I can cite you, one of the things I learned was, like, you go in front of the classroom, it's not just about you delivering a content, it's about connecting. And that was my big takeaway, which was a transformative learning for me from this. And now what I do, like, we talk, I mean, I come from a strategy angle. And a lot of time, strategists think it's about an intellectual content, but it is not, right? At the end of the day, it's about getting the team together, getting them to buy into the idea of what you want to do. So that's, without being a good emotional connector, you cannot be a good leader. So strategy and leadership, all this fundamentally thrives on your ability to connect with your top team, your rank and file. And that's where the importance of emotions comes in, George, to you.
Yeah, I would follow up on that. Perfectly said, Charles, is that the fundamental reason leaders fail is they don't connect well. It may be how they dialogue, it may be their person effect, it may be all kinds of things, but you need to bond. And it's easy to bond to people you like. But the real challenge for leaders is, how do I bond with people that I don't like or not naturally? And so what we have to do is understand that leadership is the key to bringing into force the whole process of working together. And collaboration is going to be the new model for leadership. The old model of command and control, it's over. And culture does play a part in how emotions are dealing with. But I would say even more significant is your historical way of being brought up, or your history of how you have learned leadership. And women tend to potentially be better leaders than men because they're able to create that bond. They're able to engage in emotions more than men. Now, men can do it as well. And there are certain things in talent development that we know women have to learn to be able to stand up to things that they're going to face. But in the end, it is about the ability to deal with the emotions in other people. And I learned that in hostage negotiation. I've been held hostage myself 4 times. having dealt with over 100 situations, you've got to understand the role of loss and the ability to build psychological safety. And what drives the decisions is the loss or the anticipated loss. And most leaders don't get that. Most leaders try to sell benefit. And you know this, it's in your book. Most leaders try to sell benefit before they empathize with the pain. We need leaders who are empathetic, not command and control and coercive leaders. That is.
So, George, I'm going to sort of take you back to this. You talked about you were held hostage 4 times.
Yeah.
So describe
Pretty
to me
stupid,
that moment. But it's incredible that you survived 4 scenarios. I mean, these guys were armed. What happened?
I was working in domestic violence. I was in the preliminary development of hostage negotiation before hostage negotiation teams existed in the early 70s. And I was working with the police in domestic violence, going in with police into homes where there was active violence because we knew 30-some% of people were killed in their own families. So people could pull a gun out from under a couch. They could grab a gun that was not there. And I would enter as a mediator once the police deemed it was safety, but it wasn't always safe. But fortunately, I was good at talking my way out. That's why I'm a believer that my best weapon is not a gun, it's words.
So does it mean that when you get a speeding ticket by a policeman, you can avoid paying the fine? Does it happen?
Sometimes, but not often.
So when what is it that we can learn from a scenario like hostage negotiation? What can we do? What are some of the things? I'm going to ask both of you to share some of the ideas that you would like to tell us, what we can learn from that and bring it into a workplace setting. What would be those 2 or 3 things?
Should I take a first shot at that,
Yeah,
Charles?
Sure, please.
So I think number 1 is you have to be curious. You have to be curious of what this person is. A hostage negotiation can be settled by 3 steps. 1, bonding. Bonding, even if you don't like the person, even if you don't agree. I've listened to all kind of garbage that makes me sick to my stomach, but I can't show that. I have to be able to accept it, and I have to be able to have empathy towards it. Secondly, understand the loss behind it. Happy people don't take hostages. There's grievance there. And then concession making. And interestingly enough, is that we can get a 95% success rate in hostage negotiation, physical hostage negotiation, as measured by the FBI and by Interpol, by using these 3 steps, and the hostage negotiator leading the process of managing themselves, managing others, and managing the whole team, including the SWAT team. What are some of the keys? Number 1, be curious. Ask questions. You never tell a hostage negotiator to give up their hostages and come out. No, they make the choice. Secondly, you're engaging in a process in which you want to give them that choice so that they feel empowered, but the choices come very early on. So it might be whether they want some kind of food or not, or which kind of food they want, what kind of car do they want if they are asking for a car. And then being able to empathize to the pain and accept, and then where you can be able then to start selling the benefits only after you hear what the pain is.
Yeah,
Charles.
Charles, there's a question that Bill Fisher has asked. The question is, how do you inspire curiosity in a scenario where there's somebody holding a gun to your head, but in a work setting it may not be that extreme? But even then, there are people we openly dislike. I mean, one hates working with them. And how can you be curious to understand their worldview? What are some of the tips that you would sort of really recommend?
That's a good question. So I got a gun to my head. I'm curious about what this person wants. What would it take for them to put the gun down? So I don't want to be a psychological hostage ever. And there's physical hostage taking, there's psychological hostage taking. And being able to understand powerlessness is the most dangerous state to be in. When you are powerless, then you activate either the fight-flight reflex and that creates a whole reactive process. So I'm curious, what would it take to put this gun down? What is it they want? Will you give me 1 minute to discuss this? You always have power until the trigger is pulled and you're no longer alive.
Yeah.
And the most dangerous thing is the hostage taker who is suicidal and wants to be killed by the police. It's that 5% that don't succeed. But even there, as long as the person is alive, it's possible to reach them. Now, what does this do for businesses? We have to understand leaders to never be a psychological hostage to other people, to bosses, or even to themselves. And here's what happens most of the time. They're a hostage to themselves. They get angry. They let their emotions control them, or they are filled with shame or regret or lack of confidence. And being able to understand how, in the psychological hostage situation, to free yourself and never, ever be a psychological hostage.
Yeah. I mean, just pick that up. Yeah. Let me take that. I mean, see, take the hostage. It happens in every boardroom, right? You feel that sometimes senior leaders feel hostage to the CEO because they cannot talk back and they feel pushed and they cannot push back, right? And oftentimes strategy fails when senior leaders feel hostage to the CEO. And sometimes, strangely, even sometimes CEOs feel hostage to the team, right? They cannot push the idea. Even though they want to, sometimes they feel like the team is pushing back, right? How do we develop conversations that can build? In fact, I like Bill Fisher's. Thank you, Bill, for pushing that question.
Hi,
Curiosity,
Bill.
yeah, curiosity is a big thing now, right? In the sense, like when you are stuck with what we call as familiar models in your mind, so you only think about me versus you, right? And how do you break that and bring it, and what George is referring to as the connecting or finding a new ground for finding the common ground or connecting. And that means being curious enough to see what is happening. Why am I being pushed back? Or why am I finding it hard? And then taking that courage. In fact, to some extent, curiosity always goes with that courage, because you have to step on to that. You can't walk on eggshells, in the sense you can't be always play safe. You have to push the boundaries at some point and then allow conversations to take place. I think that's where, like, the hostage taking in boardroom is happening every day, and you see it now. I mean, you see it in the political grounds. People who cannot talk back because they feel they cannot push back. And this is where this is important to take into consideration.
I think one of the beautiful, Charles, one of the points that's so important is for leaders to ask questions. Hostage negotiation is built around the right question at the right time, and then paraphrasing. So I ask a question, I get an answer, then I start paraphrasing. And I will even make a mistake intentionally in the paraphrasing to get a no from the hostage taker. Why? To empower the hostage taker, because you don't want them just to submit or agree. So you want the difference, you want the conflict, and you provoke that in a way to show I'm truly interested in finding solutions. So board members, chairmen, those people who are hostages have to learn to ask the right question and then paraphrase and move the person through a change of mindset. And Charles hit the nail on the head. It is, in the end, at the foundation, mindset that keeps the bond. And no matter if you're attacked, you're humiliated, you're rejected, don't feel like a hostage. Come back with a question.
Abhijit, in your book, you talk about incumbents, right? You talk about incumbents. You ask the employees, they tell the story, and you ask the leaders, they tell a different story, right? And that's the story of a majority of the companies today, right? And you ask yourself, why is it that information on the left hand doesn't go to the right hand, or vice versa? And you ask about it, and this is what's happening, the hostage taking, isn't it? Well, why do you think it's happening? Incumbents, why do we see this incumbents story? Yeah.
So, Charles, I think when you look at the reason why leaders in the incumbent companies are so cut off from what is happening with their employees, I think they don't really get down to really having more dialogue with the employees. And one of the things I remember coaching one of the leaders who, in their 360 feedback, one of the pieces that came up was that this person was not spending enough time, communicating with the team. So I spoke to this person. I said, this is something you might want to address. And the person said, all right, I'm very open to being coached. And the person set out a sort of a plan to spend next 30 days across each of the locations, and so it would really very extensive amount of travel and all that. And, so we did a dipstick after that to find out, how effective this was. And the people said, we didn't really find anything different. And so I was a little intrigued as to why, having spent so much of time. Then when I spoke to the people, they said, oh, this person comes in, says their piece, goes away. Now, this is something we were doing even earlier. When you say more communication, I want you to listen to what I have to say. It's not the other way around. And so I think the opportunity to listen and paraphrase and sort of put that, what both of you have referred to, I think is just so relevant even for anyone, whether it's at home, you're talking to your kid who wants to do something and you're not sort of, you're not okay with it, to negotiate and arrive at that. I mean, I just really think that it is an opportunity for all of us to learn about that.
Yeah.
I'm also sort of looking at the incumbent mindset is that we've done this before. There's very little what you can tell us what we don't know. The moment you have that mindset, you stop listening. So I think the first piece of the leader is to be able to have that humility and say, you know something which I don't, tell me about it. What is your view?
Well, you have it in your book so clearly, The Dreamers. Dreaming is about daring. It's about adventure. And Charles referred to that before. If you're going to be good at dialogue, you have to be able to dare. As a hostage negotiator, I have to take risks. And that's the second time, or the second major reason why leaders fail. Number one, they don't connect. Number two, they stop taking risk. Having a good dialogue means I start asking the right question. I'm not afraid to ask that question. I do it always with respect, but then follow up and go deeper. So many leaders in organizations stay at the surface. Let's get to what's underneath. And what's underneath? How do you feel about this strategy? How do you feel about how we're going as a team? How safe do you feel? How much do you trust me? How do you trust the team? And you get to that deeper level of how they are experiencing it. And you're always going to find where it's dysfunctional, there's a grief.
Yeah.
Dysfunctional, there is grief, you said. Grief is when you have a sense of loss. I mean, so how is this connected?
Well, it could be loss of identity. It could be loss that comes with fear. It could be loss with anticipation that you're going to have something negative happen. Fear of conflict, fear of taking risk. All of these fears are rooted in grief, in the loss. And we have to remember, grief is not just sadness. Grief is fear, anger. It's sadness, all the emotions coming together. And then you have the complex parts of this that are based on frustration, jealousy, and all those that get complex in the emotional structure of the human being. And what's so important, and I know you know this, and Charles knows this, we have to understand our history to be a good leader. If you don't understand the roots of your leadership, relationship with mother, father, grandparents, early teachers, early bosses, what happened in your leadership development, you'll never fully understand what your real potential is as a leader.
So is it reasonable to say that for leaders to be able to build that self-awareness, they must work with a coach? Is that something that would be a way forward?
Well, I would say that's ideal, but not necessarily. I think it can happen just by a dialogue with a friend, a colleague, two people sitting together, putting words to what they're feeling. I think coaching as a function of leadership is very important. You don't have to be a trained executive coach to know how to handle someone who's coming to you with a problem. The solution is not to tell them how to solve the problem. The solution is to help get into dialogue of what they feel. What is the emotion that's holding them back? Most people have the answer in their heart, but that's blocked. And Charles knows this, maybe you know it as well. We had a horrible story here of two CEOs and one CFO who committed suicide. The CEO of Swisscom, in a deep state of conflict over the restrictions he had, not being able to do what he wanted as an entrepreneur. Wow. Always when he was upset, riding his bicycle, making a stronger wall around his heart. After 6 months, he took a rope and killed himself. And we have 2 or 3 stories like this of top leaders. This was the hidden grief. And that's the obvious hidden grief. As Charles knows, every merger and acquisition, every time you've got a loss of some kind, identity to loss of employees and so forth, people suffer in grievances. You only have to ask the question, what is your grievance? What are you unhappy about? And then go deeper. Charles, do you want to add to that?
Yeah. I think, Abhijit, I think the 3 things about grief we have to think about. I mean, one, what I think George and you were alluding to in the beginning, grief underlies some of the dysfunction of a leader. So, like, in fact, in our articles, we talk about it as the unresolved grief as the derailer for leadership, right? And a lot of people can't even recognize the underlying grief that is driving the patterns of behavior in the leaders. So that's something that we have to attend to. And number 2, there is also what, in fact, in our article we touch on anticipated grief. It's not just what you have lost and the fear of losing something, right? I mean, you go back to the conversation that we had about the incumbents, the failure between leadership and the employees. Like, I don't know how far this is true, but I heard about one company in the mobile phone business when Apple released the iPhone, and the boardroom conversation was one of the senior leader brought to the CEO. We have patents on touch screen. We should probably move to the touch screen. And immediately the CEO tells him, no, that's not what we are. We are the keyboard stuff. We should move on the keyboard stuff, right? So to some extent, you think about it. Is the anticipated grief driving the type of conversation and stuff? And the moment when the other person stops talking, then we don't have any more. So anticipated grief might be the biggest one where leaders are unable to face and engage in the conversation, right? And third, you have to recognize grief is an opportunity. I mean, our fundamental thesis in the article was grief can be a healing grace for you. I mean, grief can really open up new opportunities. Like, we talk about incumbents and leaders who are not able to move. For example, COVID has been the biggest opportunity for many organizations to stop and think. People who have never thought about emotionally connecting with these employees are beginning to connect, right? So sometimes it takes a mountain to make these things come true, and we are seeing that as happening.
There's a question from one of the listeners here, and they're talking about the fact that the leadership journey is often, people say it's lonely at the top. I mean, what does one do about it? Because, there are very few people you can talk to. So how does one get over that problem?
Well, Charles and I have a common interest of sorting out myths. Like, people naturally resist change. They don't naturally resist change. They fear the pain of change or the unknown. And leaders do not have to be lonely at the top. They sometimes have to make decisions on their own, stand their own. But every top leader needs a social network. They need secure bases. And those who feel overly lonely, they do not have secure bases. And who are those secure bases? Do you really trust them? So it doesn't have to be lonely to make the decision, but you make the decision alone. And loneliness, lonely, and alone are 3 different states. And
explain them to me.
I'm sorry?
Can you explain these 3 states separately?
Yeah, you can, as a hostage negotiator, I have to make certain decisions about how to ask the questions. I would never make the decision to take a hostage out. That is made by an incident commander who may make that decision. And so I have to be able to not say, I feel lonely. I'm honored to have that position to engage and then to make a certain decision. What decisions can I make? I can recommend that they don't give the green light. This guy can be reached. I think I can get to that guy, even though I have to be able to stand on that ground. I hear many CEOs, and I know Charles hears that, and we hear it from executives. I don't have secure bases. I don't have people I can trust. And the real signal of loneliness is that you don't have people to trust. And you know where that starts? Sometimes it starts with personal friendships, personal relationships, a spouse, even, or sometimes even a close colleague can be that secure base. They don't make the decision, the top leader does, but it doesn't have to be lonely. I don't know if you want to add to that, Charles.
No, I mean, building on that, what George says, like sometimes leaders don't want to make themselves vulnerable, right? We still live in that alpha male syndrome and not willing to make ourselves vulnerable. In fact, I like Breen Brown's book on Daring Greatly, where she talks about, I mean, our infirmities can be the biggest, what do you call, a building block for our leadership. How do we open up and share and bring to that level, right? And to some extent, it takes leaders humility to sit down and talk about issues that they are facing, right? You don't have to, I mean, in fact, George is pushing a point. You don't have to feel lonely. You may have to take the decision alone, but you don't have to feel lonely. Having a conversation and willingness to get into what I call the critical dialogue is important, and you don't need to feel lonely. At the time when you have to make the decision, I mean, you have to say, like what Teddy Roosevelt said, like the buck stops here. That's what George is referring to as you have to make the decision alone, but you are in the company of people who you can draw strength from.
Sure, sure. And therefore, one of the pieces that I hear you say, and sort of Bill has also alluded to that it is fair to say that healthy dialogue is the key to to establishing secure bases, that feel anchored to something. And that really is something, we need to be looking at, which actually brings me to an interesting question
Can I add
I've always had.
Can I add one point to that? The
Of
secure
course,
base
George.
gives the psychological safety. I think that's what has to happen. Psychological safety. And for top leaders, often they feel insecure. They're not a secure base to themselves because they never had secure bases, maybe with their parents and their whole history. You can be a secure base to yourself, but only after you have secure bases, and you will always need external secure bases. So we have a lot of leaders who've never resolved that internal psychological safety. And the real challenge is when it's an ambiguous situation, when it's an unknown, when it's uncertain. How can I trust myself to make the right decision? And the key to that is getting good advice around you, having colleagues or friends, or having people who are going to tell you the truth. Tell you the truth.
I have another question that someone has asked, which I think is a terrific one, which is, when it comes to peers, one of the greatest challenges is how do you deal with feelings of jealousy? Because, in an organization, your people are competing for fewer resources, they're competing for the top spot. It's always the element of competition takes over. And yet, the nature of most of our work is such that we need people to cooperate with each other, collaborate. So this is the contradiction. It's the polarity I also mentioned in my book, Dreamers and Unicorns. That how do you deal with that? I mean, how do you work with jealousy? What is the advice of the experts?
What's your view? What is your view? Because you're the expert. You're one of the experts on that.
No, that's why I chose my words carefully. I said, let's ask the experts. We have two experts here.
George, do you want to take a shot at that?
No, I think George is better, but let me give you this one. In fact, jealousy comes always around the notion of politics, right? Or the environment is very political and stuff. And somewhere I did this statement. if you really want a place without politics, without any problem, there's only one place under the sun: graveyard.
Oh.
Right? Right?
Yeah.
Where
Yes, that's very true.
That's not
the
very
residents,
optimistic,
yeah,
Charles.
yeah, no, the residents don't fight against you, right? So when I interact with students, I tell them, like, if you really think about it, you were a product of competition. I mean, there were millions of sperms that were trying to get in, and you got in. So that was so in a sense. Our humanity is about the consistent, what do you call, a constant coexistence of competition and collaboration, right? And that's where to see how do you, I mean, imagine a football game where if you stop competing, would you have any fun? Our life would not be fun, right? So competition is a healthy component of our life, but how do we keep it in check and see the larger picture? So, I mean, you have a top team. I mean, we always talk about top team is an oxymoron because you have everybody were vying for the CEO spot. So it's like everybody's in competition constantly. No, the healthy competition is there, but unless we work together, we cannot get it done. And that's the beauty of God creation for us to the ability to compete and to collaborate simultaneously. George.
Yeah.
Right.
First, I think it starts in the mindset. You don't want to be a hostage to somebody else's jealousy. And then you move to the point of trying to build a bond with that person. And you reach out as best you can. Now, you can't always control it, but remember, you can influence up to a 95% success rate of change of mindset, change of emotion. So you build the bond by understanding what the other person wants. How are they interfering with the effectiveness of the team, of your relationship? And you communicate a sense of service. I think this is where you don't override the needs or wants of the other person, but you understand them. And you can work with somebody who is interested in career development or bonuses or whatever the external motivation is. Jealousy
Sure.
generally comes back to a problem with external motivation. If we are all committed to service, as the military units, whether it's India, American, the SEALs, around the world have one of the most powerful forms of social bonding. These guys cannot let jealousy get in the way. They cannot, they have to be able to quickly come to a consensus. And so they don't fight internally, they resolve the conflicts. Jealousy is not to be feared. Jealousy is part of the human nature of desires colliding. And how can I make a concession? How can I understand another person's what they want?
Yeah, and I always so my two penny bit on that question would be that I think when you look at jealousy or politics, we all kind of assume that there are places where there's no politics. I mean, the family has politics. Like I remember that when I would go to my hometown and we have all the family members there. Who do you choose to visit when? Who do you prioritize? Who do you,
I know that feeling.
And it's a political minefield. The WhatsApp groups of the family are the ones which are most complex ones to maneuver. You wished that person in the morning when it was their birthday. On my birthday, you wished me only in the evening. That can be the cause of much grief. So I think these are things. So politics is, if you replace that with the word influencing, you have to find different ways of influencing. And that to me is the way that, you're constantly sort of doing that any which way. So whether in the family or in the workplace, so it's not that strange. And so I'm always very suspicious of people who say, "Oh, in our workplace we have no politics." Then the person is unaware of what is going on. But
Abhijit, can I say something?
Yes, of course.
This was a brief work we did with a pharmaceutical company, which was going through a major leadership transition. And for the CEO had announced, he was diagnosed of cancer and went through some short period of leave and came back. And so everybody knew that his time was pretty much done.
Right.
And then how do you work through? In fact, about 18 months, they had to wait until the new CEO came. And during this time, I went and interviewed the whole top team, all the individual members of the top team and the CEO as well, right? Two things that came out, like how do you keep jealousy in check, or how do you keep competition in check? And one was where in fact, the CEO's statement, I made sure that at least once a month I met with each of these CEOs one on one and had a conversation. And many a time I would even have a dinner with the spouses just to make sure that we can connect. I wanted to make sure that they can trust me. In spite of the fact that all of them are competing, I have no favorites to play. Right. So that was one. I mean, the leader's ability to create a trustworthy environment and saying that their ability to feel comfortable. And the second one was the chief human resource officer. He was like a grandfather to that place. I mean, everybody knew that he was not in the game, and they were able to go out and say, hey, am I wasting my time here? Should I just move on? And went out the field. In fact, he would say, the guys would call me and say, Steve, should I move or what? But then it gave an opportunity for them to vent out the steam. So having a place for them, like what George would say, a secure base within the organization for them to have. If you have that, you can keep the competitive spirit high, at the same time, keep the team together.
So when you look at, if I were to just go back and just do a quick top two or three things that we've talked about so far before we shift gears, what are some two or three things you would just underline and remind people that we've spoken about? Anything that we already discussed, what would be your top one or two things you would point out to people to remember?
Charles, you want to take the first stab at that?
Yeah, I think to me, number one is secure base is critical. For leaders to be effective, secure base is critical. For leaders to be able to navigate through this grief and difficult circumstance, secure base is critical. And in order for you to create the secure base, number two, you need to have that credible, critical conversations. And what we call as the dialogue that should happen, you should get to that point of vulnerability, courage, and ability to willingness to accept and trust. So if we can get the secure base and conversation, those are the 2 points I would emphasize.
I would emphasize the bonding, the attachment, being able to bond to people you don't like, attach a bond to even an adversary, an enemy, and transfer them or get them to be an ally, which is very possible. Number two is be able to have a dialogue about painful things, grief, loss, whatever the painful things are, the conflicts, put those fish on the table. Don't let them be buried under the table, and create the psychological safety by fairness. I think jealousy often is exacerbated when there is a sense things are not fair. So when you have the board chairman or you have the highest level have rules or fairness as what is included, and I know CEOs who will talk to their top leaders and say, look, I know you want to have the CEO position, but it's never going to happen. And I want you to know that early enough so you can make a choice to know when, for your own career, you want to leave. And there are CEOs who have developed many talented CEOs by getting them to leave and face the grief that they will never get that top position.
Sure. One of the questions that when I read your article in McKinsey Quarterly about unresolved grief being a leadership derailer, one of the questions that came up naturally was that you talk about the fact that the grief comes from the fact that you're leaving behind something which is familiar. So as you're looking at that, is that the reason why unlearning something is much tougher? Because you have to be comfortable enough to leave behind something and then move forward. So is that the reason why learning new stuff is so hard? What would be your view on that?
I'll take a stab on it. I think it's really risk-taking, daring. As you described with your dreamer's idea, that you have to dare. And there are people every day, only about 20%, who are truly high performers. They're playing to win, not playing not to lose. So they don't take that defensive stand. They're playing to win. They make choices to engage in pain. The brain hates pain, let's face it. But pain is a signal that's very important for certain successes. If you want to be an athlete, you want to be a musician, you have to go through, talent development.
Sure.
And so we have to be able to encourage seeking adventure, daring as the foundation. And then the rewiring becomes automatic. But you need secure basis. You need psychological safety for that to happen. There's where the executive coach comes in. There's where the father, the mother, the grandfather, the boss, someone to be a secure base, to be there to fall back on, like in mountain climbing, the belayer. And then rewiring the brain becomes a fairly simple process, because pain is not the end result. Pain is a pathway to something more an opportunity. And that's why with this pandemic, people are in a universal state of grief. The whole world is grieving, but not everybody has turned it into a victimization. They're not hostages to it. For some people, they've turned it into opportunities. They see the benefits. They've learned from it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, unlearning comes from two aspects, right? One is our own personal side, how we are able to move on from one success to another. I mean, in fact, in your book, you talk about life is a series of S-curve, right? Yes, so jumping from one S-curve to another S-curve to another S-curve. And it is a personal pain. In fact, what I learned from George is this: our brain is so wired for protecting us from pain, right? So in essence, we sort of see a posture out there, but it's going to be painful. And our brain is wired to keep us safe and says, okay, so that's where the inertia, the personal inertia comes from. So what we learn from all these athletes and high performers is it's okay. Pain is okay. No pain, no gain. So how do we live comfortable with that pain? And the second aspect of unlearning is the social part of it. Like, I think this psychology story about the monkeys and the bananas and hot water, right? So in essence, you bring this, you chain the monkeys, and then by the time you chain, everybody has changed. But then
you should tell the story, because some of our listeners may not know the story. So Charles, tell us.
So this was an experiment with a monkey put at with a group of monkeys put at the bottom of a staircase, and a banana hung on the top of the staircase. And of course, the monkeys see the banana and they all jump up. And as soon as they start climbing up, they spray very chill water on the monkeys, and the monkeys go back, right? So that happens over and over, and over time they are conditioned to that mindset, right? And what they do, they take one monkey away and then bring a new monkey in, right? Mm-hmm. And then there are 6 old monkeys and the one new monkey, and the banana is hung. And immediately, guess what? The one monkey that was the new, it goes up quickly. And then what happens? Even before the chill water comes in, all the other 6 monkeys drag that monkey down, right? So just imagine, it is not the condition of the individual, the coterie around you, right? So that's also another problem of unlearning. So how do you break not only the personal barriers that are within, but the organizational barriers? Now imagine a company that has invested in a huge set of manufacturing assets. You are moving into digital. They feel handicapped, right? So how do you cannibalize? Willingness to cannibalize and let go. In fact, Bill Fisher would say, taking the pain of kill it and go, otherwise you don't get to the new one.
So what you're saying, Charles, monkey business in the boardrooms and in those senior meetings.
Oh, you see a lot, yeah.
And one aspect that comes up really, and we are coming to the end of our conversation. Of course, I could just go on and on with this, but when you think about it, one of the conclusions I'm sort of drawing from all what we talked about, I think there is a very, very important shift that is happening in the workplace, and which is about the importance of the leaders understanding emotions, being able to work with emotions, their own emotions, the emotions of other people, And the emotions now are going to become the basis of new business models or new ways in which you engage with the customers, designing customer experiences. So there's a huge shift in that direction. My question to both of you is that when you look at the learning and development teams, um, what is the agenda that you would set for them for, let's say, the next 12 to 18 months? Because we are going to be in a world which is going to be hybrid. Some people are going to want to come in and work. Some will say, no, I'll stay at home. Some people will say, I'll come in on 2 days of the week. So it is going to be a very sort of, it's not going to be a uniform workplace. um, what would be what are some two or three skills that you would recommend learning and development does from top to bottom? Or would you say the senior leaders work on something else and the mid-level people work on something else? How would you categorize that?
Great question. Charles, why don't you take a stab at that?
I mean, I would put it in one word: dialogue. In fact, one of your listeners put the word hearing, more listening than hearing, right? Our willingness to listen, our willingness to speak, our willingness to push the idea that you believe in. In fact, Peter Senge used to use the word assertive inquiry, in the sense you are confident on what you are speaking, at the same time willingness to open the space for the others to give the chance to enlighten you, right? And that comes only if you have a secure base. That comes only if you have the courage to push the boundaries. That comes only if you are willing to be vulnerable. All these are important. I mean, to me, everything centers around this dialogue, ability to have the dialogue. And this is where we need to push. In fact, we need to sort of, I mean, in fact, the Netflix CEO wrote this book, No Rules, Rules. In fact, one of the best chapter in that book is on feedback, chapter 2. How do we give feedback? I mean, I love George because he's phenomenal in providing feedback. And we have years between us, but we can speak to each other and provide feedback and listen to each other. So that I learned a big thing from him. And that's something that we have to train our leaders and train our senior managers.
I would add to that the whole issue of psychological safety and building trust. The new challenge in the world of alternate facts, the world of fake news, we all have had our minds affected by some real garbage. And we have to be able to have leaders who are going to have truthfulness come back. What is the truth? And the only way to really sort this out is to look at evidence. And where there's not evidence, find some consensus of what the reality is. So that means leaders have to be especially paying attention to trust and building psychological safety. I think for younger people coming into the workforce, so-called millennials, we have to be aware also that they don't have the same tolerance for pain that many of us in the older generations.
Why don't millennials have
things too easy? They didn't have to work for them. I grew up on a farm. You have to start working at 5 a.m, milking those cows, no matter how cold it is. So many young people, and we all have to see this as a leadership development talent, and I know you know that, is to be able to endure pain, to earn what you want in whatever it is you're creating. And so there's going to be a stronger need of those people having a secure base to help coach, help model what they can do. Now, the whole world, as Bill Fisher knows, the entrepreneur, the creativity, the new ideas that are coming from the millennials is phenomenal. But for them to not be discouraged or expect something to happen too fast. And Charles hit it on the head, being able to endure failure. Many people cannot endure failure, and their good feedback is going to point out where you can improve. So not to be feedback avoidant, but you want the truth. How can I improve?
And in a number of instances, we find that, in a lot of management literature, you find that the word, strengths and weaknesses The word weaknesses is camouflaged to say lots of things. These are opportunities. These are development options. These are so that's the uh, because and then there is this whole thing of strength-based coaching. We are not going to talk about the fact that you are blind. We are not going to. We'll give you a driver's license, but we'll only tell you that you've got very strong hands. So it's really, I think, a completely ridiculous,
It's called
proposition.
sugar coating. It's called sugar coating. You can't change a pig by putting lipstick on its mouth. It is a
And,
pig.
Yeah.
and doesn't matter
No,
how many shades of lipstick you put on the pig.
yeah.
So,
No,
And remember,
no.
the key is respect. The bonding and respect. You can say the truth to
Yeah.
people. Put the fish on the table. Go through the bloody mess of that conflict. If you have the ability to maintain the bond and you do it with respect, and that crosses cultures because some cultures are more respectful and they save face. Other cultures are too much in your face. They take the fish and slap you across the face. But to be able to deal with cultural differences, but in the end, come back to the truthfulness.
Yeah. And then Abhijit, I want to close on a big note. I mean, positive note. I think I see a great opportunity. I mean, if you see the millennials and the next generation that comes after them, they are much more conscious and they are much more balanced. And we see a world that is much more open to the stuff. In fact, I would venture to say, in fact, the first question you started with globalization, that's where I would like to end. In fact, it is the beginning of a new globalization era that we are going to see. I mean, what we saw, the flippant era of this last 5, 6 years, I think we are going to see a very different move in the coming years. Inclusiveness, environment, all this will become important agenda and building the best livelihood for every single human being. That's going to be a major challenge. And I think our new generation is ready for it. And that's where we are looking to you as the human leaders and human resource champions to sort of building the human capital. I mean, Gary is the Nobel laureate. He used to talk about the everything is on human capital, and I think we have a great opportunity to bring human capital back to its full force.
Thanks. I'm just going to, for the benefit of all the audience, I'm going to just talk about two or three things that were big takeaways for me. One, I think we started with this whole concept of is it the end of globalization? And we are saying that it's just morphing into a different stage of evolution and a different set of things are going to drive it as compared to what has happened in the past. And then we spent a lot of time understanding the importance of emotions that are coming into the workplace. And we said that do not be a hostage to the emotions because the only way that you can get past is to put the emotion onto the table, discuss it out, the power of dialogue, and then actually making sure that that ability gets, so you are doing that on an ongoing basis. So you can still be authentic, you can talk about tough things, and you can do it still with respect. So for me, that was the other one. The third point, which was again, I think, which was a terrific takeaway for me, which was really that the importance of really looking at how do we train the leaders to be able to start working with people you don't like. And there was this beautiful conversation about jealousy, which I learned so much from, was that you can be authentic and put things on the table because learning to manage this is also an important skill. So being able to build that. So all in all, it was an absolutely outstanding conversation. And thank you very much, Charles and George. Thank you very much for reading my book, and more importantly, for being here to share your wisdom and experience. I'm deeply grateful to you for doing that. Even though it was done at very short notice, very, very grateful for that. For the listeners, our next conversation is going to be on the 1st of January 2021. And we are now going to, the surprise element is that we have one of the first stand up comedians of India who came in when stand up comedy was not quite understood. People said, you crack jokes. So is that a profession? How does it work? So the name of that guy is Papa CJ. You saw him a little while back. Papa CJ was there, and If you're here, do give everybody a shout. But we will have Papa CJ. So 1st of January, 7 p.m. Indian Standard Time. We will see you right here. And until then, thank you very, very much for being there, with this fabulous panel of Charles Dhanraj and George Kohlreiser. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you. And I
Thank
wish
you.
you all and all your listeners a very happy holiday.
Yes, happy holidays and a wonderful new year ahead. Thank you, Bijit. This is good. George, you remember our first conversation was that you thought I had my first calling was in stand-up comedy.
I remember.
So you can join in and see if you can give Papa CJ,
He's quite a comedian.
No, thank you, Abhijit. This was wonderful. Thank you, and it was very illuminating. Yeah. I look forward to another conversation with you. Thank you. Thank you, George. We'll